Hey there, listeners. A quick new update for you that I promise is going to be shorter than the last one. First off, Patreon members at $5 a month or higher will be able to listen to ad-free episodes starting at episode 100 and going forward for basically as long as this podcast keeps going. You can listen either in the Patreon app or through Spotify, where you can get an exclusive RSS feed available only to Patreon members. This is one of the easiest ways to support the podcast for just $5 a month, and I hope you enjoy your ad-free experience. Second, those single barrels are almost here. The Barrel Rye, finished in Armagnac and picked with This Is My Bourbon Podcast, and the 2 Jack Daniel's Barrel Proof Ryes are on their way. Patreon members will have exclusive discounts and prime access. Even $1 a month means you'll have a few hours more to get those bottles before they're released to the public. Last thing, there are now 2 spots available in the monthly Bottle Share Club available to patrons at the $25 a month tier. If you're interested, I wouldn't hesitate. I expect the spot to go quickly. If it looks like it's all filled up and you're still interested, shoot me an email and we'll see if we can open up just one more spot. With that, thanks everyone, and enjoy this episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Today, we're going down to Tennessee, and I am so excited to have on with me Lexie Phillips. She is the assistant distiller at Jack Daniel's. She is right hand to master distiller Chris Fletcher, and most importantly, she was also the leader of the double Jack Daniel's Barrel Proof Rye pick that the Whiskey Ring Podcast did back in June. Had to think for a second when it was, but yeah, that was back in June. So Lexie, welcome on.
Thank you very much for having me on. I'm excited to talk all things whiskey.
Absolutely, that's what we do here. So I wanted to start off with a question just to get a sense of where you're feeling right now. So back in 2022, when you were just a little bit after you were elevated to the position, you were talking with Mark at Whiskey Cast, and you said the first thing was most people don't understand the super in the weed stuff. And this was in reference to festivals and things. And he said, at festivals, you have to tell the fun parts without getting too deep into the weeds. So first thing is feel free to get into those weeds today.
Oh, good.
We like the weeds. We like the nerdy stuff. And then the other backdrop I just want to throw at you is 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, in July 2021, you were on Jazz Drinking Bourbon with John Edwards, and you said at that point you were still getting used to being on podcasts and being a brand ambassador. And I'm just curious, as a first question, 2 years later, after COVID and after all these things that have happened, has that changed?
I think it's changed a little bit. I'll say there's always just that touch of anxiety of getting out kind of in front of people, even though it's just kind of you and me right now. So I don't think that's ever something that will truly go away completely. But I'll say I've gotten I've gotten comfortable enough to just be able to speak what's in my mind and kind of be able to package that in a way that people can understand, whether it's in the weeds or not, you know what I mean? And kind of appreciate the whiskey we're talking about. So I think it's gotten easier, but there's always just that little tinge of anxiety before any interviews, podcasts, getting in front of people.
Fair enough. I'll be honest, we just passed 100 episodes of this podcast, so 2.5 years or so. And I love it. It gives me so much pleasure to do this and talk to people like you. I still get a little anxious before each one. Just like, have I done the research? Did I miss something?
That's it. I think
but
that's just part of the getting ready for it. Hoping you're prepared, and just seeing where the conversation takes us.
Absolutely. So let's start with, after all that backdrop, let's start with another throwback to a podcast. So this was in June of last year. You were on Barrel to Bottle, and you said that you were the 6th woman to be a distiller at Jack Daniel's. Now, you have the title of assistant distiller. I'm assuming when you said 6 women to be a distiller, that was kind of irrespective of title.
Right.
So the first question, and I don't mean this at all to be like, what does it mean to be a woman? What is it? That's a larger conversation and something I don't want to necessarily
Right.
focus on here. But as assistant distiller and knowing what that means at Jack Daniels, what does that mean for you as a title and just as who you are?
Truly, I mean, it is an absolute honor to be honestly one of just a handful of female whiskey makers at Jack Daniels, and to be the first woman to be able to hold this position at Jack Daniels, to be the first female assistant distiller. So I'll say, it was a couple months because I actually officially came into this role in November of 2020. The world was absolutely crazy.
Mhm.
Um, but a couple of months after that, we were at a small little concert at a local marina near our house, and I had a one of our lady tour guides. We ran into each other in the women's bathroom of all places, where a lot of memories are always made, good conversations. And I didn't know her that well at the time, but she came up to me and just gave me the biggest hug. And she said, "I'm just so proud of what you were doing for women in Jack Daniels." And I mean, it still today gives me chills because I mean, it hadn't fully sunk in yet that I guess I was the first woman to blaze this trail. So the support that I've received has been, my gosh, just absolutely overwhelming. And I mean, even still now, a couple of years later, I'm still having people that I worked side by side with in bottling be like, "I'm just so proud of you, to have started at the bottom where we all started, working temporary part time, and you have made your way to where you are now, helping lead innovation and through distillery operations." Um, so I think it is something that I'm just kind of overcome with pride and a little humility at times, just because I want to be very humble about it, but it's something that we're all a little proud of. So it's been a lot of fun and, like you said, a lot of learning on the brand ambassador side, but I've had an absolute blast with it.
And again, without making it too much about that conversation,
Yeah.
um, do you do you kind of foresee uh, Jack Daniels and even if you want Brown Foreman as a whole, kind of embracing that role of having more women and female whiskey makers in the future? I mean, this could be anything from just a recognition to a full on, the Master Distiller series of bottlings that they did for the first seven. I don't think they've put out Chris's yet, so I think it's only past Master
Not yet.
Distiller. Not yet.
Yeah.
Do you see kind of that recognition coming, or and are you satisfied with where we are right now?
I'll start kind of at the end and tell me which questions I didn't really hit.
That's
So I
fine.
think I'm very happy with where we're at because I mean you can see growth in all levels of diversity coming up through the ranks. And speaking of female whiskey makers, we've had a woman working at our distillery since 1991. That was when Miss Ada Preston, the first whiskey making woman at Jack, started. So we've got 3 decades under our belt of women in the whiskey making process. And, Brown Foreman as a whole, we've had women in roles similar to mine for a very long time, with like Elizabeth McCall, who was assistant master distiller for several years before I came into my role. And she actually just stepped up to master distiller. So I'm so very proud of that. Because, speaking in terms of, I'll say, recognition, um, normally around pretty much kind of the month before and after and during Women's History Month, um, it's something that Brown Foreman does that I really, really enjoy. We do Women of the Grapes and Grain. So we're taking women that are similar to roles like mine, master distillers, assistant distillers, um, or women in the wine side, we come together and kind of all tell our stories on how we got here. And, I'll say the focus is kind of on women and how we got to where we are. But one thing that kind of we all had in common, our mentors weren't all women. It takes men and women for us all to succeed. My biggest mentors are two guys and a couple offices down behind me right now, and they taught me everything that I knew at the distillery. So I think it's recognizing the women, but also the men and women that helped us get to where we are. So I'll say I'm very happy with where we're at because we get to do things like that. Um, yeah, yeah. I had one thing because I think, being the first woman in this position, I definitely won't be the last. So there's
Mhm.
going to be many more women involved. And that's something, maybe there will be a women's series one day, but kind of like a Gentleman Jack, you don't have to be a gentleman to drink it. You don't have to be a lady to drink a women's series either.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So with that, I want to jump right into the barrel pick that we did. And I should say,
Yes.
not only double, we ended up within the group that was down there taking three of the four barrels that were there,
Yes.
which I did not anticipate, but it worked out. So we'll
Hey,
have
when you
two.
find something you like.
Yeah. This was a group, and this is going kind of two places through, the whiskey ring as one, and then the first whiskey group that I joined was the New Jersey Bourbon and Yacht Club, the one that's not on New Jersey and doesn't have yacht, and not all of us only drink bourbon. So it between the two of us and then another group in Chicago, we'll have plenty of barrel proof rye to go around. So that should be coming in a couple of weeks probably. So I guess the first question I wanted to ask with that was, kind of understandably in my mind, at Jack Daniels, rye in some ways inevitably takes a back seat to the Tennessee whiskey just because of the history of the Tennessee whiskey being there. It was the only thing produced there for a very long time in varying products. So it's not a measure of the quality of one versus the other, but just the quantity and tradition that makes
Right.
the rye take kind of a backseat for now. And that's not to say nothing of the single malt, which we'll get to later. Um, to your knowledge, when the rye was first being thought of, when the team first thought maybe we should introduce a rye to our portfolio, what was kind of the impetus for that?
I'm at that time I was actually still in college when they were coming up with that. But I'd say, rye is such a traditional whiskey. It's something that we have the ability to make. So I think it was one of those things of innovation starting to come to life, and rye has been taken off quite a bit. So the decision was probably just like, hey, we can do this. Let's go ahead and get started and do kind of our own version of it. And that's where to be a rye whiskey, you've got to be at least 51% rye grain, and you can go all the way up with it. Um, us personally, we decided to land on that 70% rye grain in our mash bill, just because it wasn't a monolithic rye spice. I feel like it was able to add a little bit more complexities to it, let some of that barrel character shine through those almost like a maple sweetness, vanillas and caramels, and then also some of the influence from our yeast that gives you kind of those fruity characters like apple, pear, banana. So I'm really glad that we did end up landing on the 70% rye grain because to me that just makes a perfect spot for our combination of everything within the process. And really, I think our first rye that we released was single barrel rye. And of course, I'm a little partial to single barrels, with each one having their own little differences, uniqueness to each one. um, it was really just a lot of fun. So I will say rye has its own special characters in the distilling process. It makes it a little bit more of a sticky mash. Um, so not quite as challenging as malt whiskey, but it still has its own little differences. Because I mean, Tennessee whiskey, we've got that down to a science. We know how to make that all day long. Rye takes just a little bit more babysitting. Um, so I think it's something that we got in, I'm going to say at a good time, because I'm a huge fan of what we've been able to do with our rye whiskeys coming from 2016 to now. We've had several innovations that we've led on with the rye whiskey. So I'm glad we got it started when we did.
And the company took some risks too at the beginning, releasing the unaged rye.
That's it. Just
Yeah,
trying
and
to let people
then
know we were making it. That was actually starting to work in quality control at when they shortly after they released that. I don't know what people thought it was going to taste like, but we had a couple taste complaints that they're like, "This is not rye whiskey." We're like, "Well, it's rye distillate,
right.
not white rye whiskey yet." And then the 2-year-old rye whiskey.
Mhm.
What did we call that?
The
Oh
rested
gosh,
rye.
rested rye. Yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, so yeah, they were stepping it out there, letting people know we were on the rye train.
Look, I'm a huge fan of it personally. I can say I honestly do not have a bottle of Old Number Seven in my cabinet. It's more of I just don't have room, frankly. But also, um, in fairness to the product, it's something that I know that if I go out for a drink or something, I can usually find it if I want.
Right.
Um, the rye, on the other hand, the base rye, if you will, 90 proof rye, I do have a bottle of because for me, I have been on more of a rye kick, admittedly, but I think it also offers so much extra complexity while retaining that Jack note. Like for me, it's still recognizable. Still has that isoamyl acetate banana note in there.
Yep.
Um, that depending on the product can be anything from kind of a runts banana, the kind of artificial banana, to a real, banana, what we think of today.
Yeah.
So, uh, it, so I do have a bottle of that. Love the single barrel, but of course, being a barrel proof guy, the higher the proof, the better. What can I say?
Oh yeah.
Um, but so this came about. The interest in Jack Daniel's rye in particular, really for me took off with the Tennessee Tasters rye, and still have multiple bottles of that because I snatched up every single one that I could, as did everyone in my group because I shared it with them, and everyone said, "Oh my God, this is some of the best rye that I've tried in years." And I think at that point it was about 5.5 to 6 years old, something like that.
Yeah.
And it just blew my mind. It was candied, it was sweet, but not saccharine. Uh, Great mouthfeel, not too oaky, but still had a backbone. And we were all saying to each other, like, what is this? Is this brand new? None of us had even considered the Jack Rye before. And
Yeah.
then, a year later, you've got the limited edition, the yearly release being the single barrel rye, which was, from what I understand, the Tennessee Tasters allowed to age for another period of time, just a longer period of time, I should say, and then put into those single barrels. And that we all fell in love with too. Although I think for me, I'm still partial to the Tennessee Tasters
Are
version.
you?
I think so. I love the LE and I even love the barrels we chose, but there's something about those tasters that I just, I'm sad that I will never find another one out there, but
That's
uh,
it.
yeah, but it's some really great stuff. Uh, so uh, yeah, so the group kind of picked up as many as we could. Um, but so I wanted to take a minute to jump into the process of rye because
Yeah.
it's made at a different facility, still in the Jack Daniel's grounds, but different facility than Tennessee whiskey. And here we get a chance to really go into that nerdiness that we both like.
Yeah.
So, from my understanding, the when making the rye mash, the team sours it with lactobacillus, pasteurizes to kill the lactobacillus off, then inoculates with yeast from mother strain F. Doing okay so far?
So I'll say from the yeast standpoint, just the mother strain. I think you said, did you say F after that? It's just a
Yes.
regular, yeah. Just
Okay.
we have one strain of yeast, so just yeah, regular
Okay.
yeast that we've
Okay.
had since Prohibition. Yep.
So that was going to be one of my questions was whether it was. I think I would have to look back to see where I saw that it was F specifically, but I mean, if it's F across the board, then it's just mother strain. Yeah.
Yeah, we just
But
yeah, mother strain.
right. The is this so this is a strain that you said you've had since Prohibition. Uh and that does answer the question too of whether you're using a different strain for the rye or it's single malt. So
Yep, same
did
one.
hey, if it works, it broke, don't fix it. Uh I know you weren't there, you were still in college when it was first being created and ideated and all of that. But to your knowledge, uh what was the kind of initial expectation of the rye, both inside and from the public?
Um, I would say something, something I really love love to think of in my job, and I think that's something that I've seen across the board here is to protect the traditions of making a great product while still being able to innovate, to stay kind of along with the times with innovation. And I think that would be something that was in the goal, something that's a little bit different with Jack's spin in it. Kind of like you said, when you sip it, it's different. But you can tell it still has that same Jack Daniels backbone. And I think that's exactly what they were going for, to where when you sip a glass of our either whether core rye or the barrel proof rye, you're like, dang, this is really good. But I can tell this is a little bit Jack Daniels. So I think that's something that they would have gone after at that time, because that's something we're still going after today.
And you said the public reaction at first was, wow, this is, might have been good or bad, but it's like, this is definitely different from number seven, Gentleman Jack, which would have
That's
all come
it.
out at that time.
For
I think,
the unaged, yes.
yeah. So are there, besides the yeast is the same, the overall process for the rye itself is the same. Do you use the same type of barrels and
Yeah.
aging as well?
Yep, that's all still the same too. So really the only differences are the grain bill, which is the 70% corn, or excuse me, 70% rye grain, 18% corn, and that same 12% malted barley. And then charcoal mellowing, instead of going through dripping through 10 feet of sugar maple charcoal, it's closer to about 3 feet. They did notice that when they did it through 10 feet, it pulled so much of the rye character out that they decided to lessen that.
And the 3 feet is I know it's not the same part of the process, but it's similar to the secondary of Gentleman Jack.
Yes. Now this one is gravity fed, like our normal charcoal mellowing process. The Gentleman Jack is pumped through, um, but a very similar concept to how Gentleman Jack is charcoal mellowed the second time.
Again, I'm glad it was only 3 feet because there's so much flavor in there that we wouldn't want
That's
to
it.
take too much out of there. And uh, I'm side note, I'm very honest with my guests, and if I don't like something, I'll say it. If I do, I will, and I'll laud them for things that make sense. And in this case, I think it is worth saying that Jack Daniels is a massive company within an even larger massive company of Brad Foreman, but you still had the uh, still made the choice to not just do what was kind of the norm, but to say, all right, the 3 feet works better. So we're going to do the 3 feet instead of the 10 feet or maybe 5 feet. And I think for me, it's worth noting that because not every large company is that nimble or that flexible or willing to change things up. So,
Well, that's it. I think sometimes, with everybody talking craft distilleries and things like that, they get to talking on the size of the company. Um, but really, I believe that the size of our company, Jack Daniels, I'll say, um, gives us the ability to be able to be a little more nimble on things like that. Um, just because, if something's not right, we have some very dedicated quality control, distillery managers, of course, the master distiller, assistant distiller. If something's not right, none of us have a problem being like, we need to stop and think about this for a second. Um, so I think really still just allowing us to be very hands-on, and that gives us a lot of pride over our product. So I think speaking in terms of that, I'm really glad that we have that ability to be able to change things like that. If we're not happy with the character of the whiskey, then we're going to change it to what it needs to be.
and with that, the last question I have on specifically on the rye is again, we learned during the tour that the rye and the single malt are distilled at a different building up the road than
Yep.
the Tennessee whiskey. Uh, so the first question on that is, was there something about the production of those two grain bills and products that necessitated a different spot? Or is it more just it would be easier to start fresh than to try to shoehorn those two into an already well-oiled machine?
So when we first started making malt whiskey and rye whiskey, it was all done. I'll refer to them as JD1 and JD2, because JD2 is really at the top of the hill, right behind JD1. Um, what we did since 1938 up until 2014, everything was made right there at JD1, and then we ran out of space. Our last expansion of fermenters was actually digging out part of a hill to be able to put fermenters in. And that distillery was made pretty much with the Tennessee whiskey grain bill in mind. So once we saw that we were going to be making other grain bills, and we knew that we would need to expand again, just to keep up with demand, we went right to the top of the hill and made another distillery that has two stills in it. Um, and that is where we do Tennessee whiskey, but also our specialty runs. It was designed truly with innovation in mind, to where we can pretty well segregate, and because rye and malt both take quite a while to grind in the hammer mills. So those are designed with two scale hoppers of each, to where you can grind at the same time you're feeding to the cooker, and it just makes it a lot more efficient up there, from being able to swap between specialty grains, or just in timing in general. Instead of taking time away on the production schedule of Tennessee whiskey, we can do that along with our specialty products. So everything is the same from JD1 to JD2. All the water temperatures still uses 100% cave water in the process. It's just a little bit newer building.
Makes sense. At a certain point, you're going to run out of space. And for anyone who hasn't taken the tour, I definitely encourage people to get down there and see these facilities in person. You don't get to visit JD2 quite yet, but you see JD1, the kind of main distillery, if you will, and you
Yes.
just see the massive columns that are there, the ones where you can stand if you obviously assuming they're off, number one, but um, you can stand in them and put your arms out, and if you're a normal sized person, you're probably not going to touch the sides. Like they're huge. They're like 84-inch columns, something like that.
74.
74. Okay, so maybe
Yeah.
slightly shorter. So I'm
Yeah.
5'10, so I'm 70 inches tall. So I could lay on the base and not touch the sides with 2 inches to spare on either side. It's huge, and you don't get a scale of that until you're there. And unlike some other distilleries that have columns of that size, you can go right up next to these monstrosities and really get a feeling of, wow, looking up like,
Yeah.
wow, that is a big sucker right there. So it's worth taking that tour
Absolutely.
for many reasons, but I think that and the cave, I think, are um my two favorite parts of that tour for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the
Yeah.
cave is just it's something special. That just draws people, we have around 200 to 300,000 visitors every year. And that is where everybody is just always amazed that we are still using the same water that Mr. Jack used starting in the 1880s. So I think that's a special feeling that we get. And to be able to use that, of course, for both distilleries, to where every drop of water that goes into making this whiskey, any Jack you've ever drank, that is from cave spring water. And that's just the coolest thing ever to me.
Totally agreed. So that's actually a really good transition to the next line of questioning, which is about Lynchburg itself and the site of the distillery. So to me, at least, and understand, I'm a New York City born and bred Long Islander, so I'm used to everything's 20 minutes away. Public transit as everywhere. So to me, at least, Lynchburg is relatively remote
Yeah.
from major cities. It's about an hour and a half from Nashville, where I've stayed both times that I visited, and it's a beautiful drive down. It's still an hour and a half. You got to account for that. When the group after the tour and the pick, we were treated to lunch at Miss Mary Bobo's, which was wonderful, and we were sitting with one of the town historians and archivists, and he was saying, the entire county has maybe 1,800 voters. That's my apartment building has 100 units in it, so it's a very different scale. It's you really have
Yes.
to understand it's a different scale. Um, so with being a little bit more remote and being not really having another distillery immediately in the vicinity, I would say,
Yeah.
uh, a question came to mind that something the bourbon industry and American whiskey industry as a whole is known for is the sense of camaraderie, of rising tide lifts all boats, the sharing of knowledge even on competitors, and sometimes, like in the case of the Heaven Hill Fire, actual sharing of product to help them get back on their feet rather than just letting them die off.
Right.
So by being geographically separated, number one, and also being separated because you're not in Kentucky, it's Tennessee, so you can't share Kentucky bourbon, and then so there's just a little difference there. Um, the I guess I'm questioning: is it a different experience being a Jack Daniels because you are separate from others because you have a different process that is specific to Tennessee and all that, or is there still a sense of camaraderie outside of the distillery?
There's still a sense of camaraderie because they have the like the Tennessee Distillers Guild, where I think there's like between 40 and 50 different distilleries now. And I've gone to a couple of those events. And no, I mean, it's just like you're with friends that you've known for years, even though you may have just met them that day. I mean, there's so much that goes into, you know, everything on making the whiskey, bottling the whiskey, that side, plus the marketing of it. Um, and advertising. I mean, there's so many things at play. And it's like instantly when you walk into a room of people that are in the same field as you, I mean, you already automatically feel a little bit of a connection, like, ooh, how do y'all do it? Like, how are y'all getting through this? Um, so I definitely think there's camaraderie. I mean, because like me and my husband, who also works here at Jack Daniel's, um, even before I was in this position, I absolutely love going to different distilleries to see the process. And I mean, because it's a process that amazes me so much, I just love seeing the different ways that it's done. And I don't think that I'm unique in that way. I think a lot of distillers feel the same way. They're like, oh, that's cool. We do it this way and they do it that way. And we're still kind of getting around about the same outcome. Um, so I think it kind of opens your mind as to there's a lot of different ways you can do it. And just be fascinated at, I'll say, the art part that they've put on the science, because I mean, looking at a like a blueprint of a still, that's absolutely amazing. But when you actually go in a still tower, there's so much more in there than what's on that blueprint.
Right.
All the different P traps and the steam here. You can change this water to a different water source, and to cool the condenser. I mean, there's so much in there, and to be able to see how other folks do it, that's a really cool way, because it's truly eye-opening.
And flipping that question a bit, you yourself have quite a generational legacy at Jack Daniels. Is it 2 dozen family members since Prohibition?
Yeah, stopping at my grandmother's third cousin, it's about 2 dozen family members, past and present.
That's mind-boggling to me. It's incredible. Um, so flipping that other question to the internal camaraderie of Jack Daniels, there's so many examples of that generational transfer of knowledge and position. So Chris Fletcher being Frank Bobo's grandson, and
Mhm.
you having 24 members of your family, and hearing so many different people say, oh yeah, my father, cousin, generations back worked here. Of course, the Nero Screen story with there's been a member of the Green family there
Yes.
since the beginning. Uh, does the do you think that the trying to figure out exactly how I want to phrase this? Do you think that that connection internally and from generation to generation is strengthened because of either the I'll use the remoteness, but the lack of distilleries around you, or is it something else about the Jack Daniels culture over the years that just begs people to come back, family member after family member?
I think I'll say a little bit of both, honestly. Because number one, I mean, Jack Daniels is a great company to work for. I mean, they've always had some of the best benefits and pay around. And when you have that, along with I'm gonna say the Jack Daniels culture, I mean, it feels very family and friend oriented. Me coming into Jack Daniels, my great aunt kind of helped me get the position, and she wouldn't have done that if it was a bad job. If um, like one of my family members, actually one of my cousins, she wanted to work here in the quality control lab, and I'm like, yeah, it's an awesome job. I'll put in any good word I can for you, because I'd love to share it with family and friends, and the people I like a lot, you know. So I think it is a little bit of both, because it keeps that culture of, pretty much everybody knows everybody. You want to help each other out. I wanted to make my family members that had worked here in the past, I wanted to make them proud. Of course, I never knew I'd end up where I am now. I just kind of followed what interested me. Um, but it's kind of a means of quality control to continue passing this on to other family members. Um, because being generational here, like you said, I mean, that's not a rare thing at all. If I go out on the road or if I'm doing a talk with people and I'm telling people that, they're like, that's amazing. And I'm like, it is, but if you're in Lynchburg, it's not rare. Just because it's a great job. And there's so many different areas, from quality control, the distillery, to warehousing, to bottling, to used barrels, even grounds crew, maintenance. There's a little bit of something for everybody. Um, so I think culture and just everybody kind of wants to share it with the people closest to them. My husband, he actually was working here before um, I knew him, so we met here at work, and so I'll say, Jack Daniel's has always kind of been um, one of our connections. One of our first dates was the Jack Daniel's 150th anniversary. We Nathaniel Ratliff had a concert here at Jack Daniel's, and that was one of our first dates because he won tickets and I didn't. And I'm like, well, you've got to take me then.
That
So
would be a
we
condition of a continued relationship at that point.
exactly
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But that kind of culture and just how, every year Jack Daniel's puts on company picnics and employee golf tournaments, and it just really makes you feel like Jack Daniel's Brown Foreman really cares about you. Um, so it's something that we really really hold on to.
It's great. And I love the another story that I came across that both you and Josh came in with a I forget who had which, but one had a dog named Jack and one had a cat named Jack.
Yep. He had a
Yeah.
dog and I had a cat named Jack. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Are
They
you
are
more of a
our
cat
two
person
highest
or
maintenance. Yeah, I had
okay.
they called me a little bit of a crazy cat lady. I promise I'm not. They just kind of come to me. I have three cats and a dog, and he had two dogs, which we've lost one of those since then. So we are still at three cats and two dogs.
So like I was more of a dog person, I always thought. And then my now wife is definitely a cat person. We've got two, and the only reason they're not showing up right now because they love Zoom calls is because I've learned to close the doors for interviews.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
Only because once in a while they'll sit on the keyboard and end the recording somehow, or but
They have a mind of their
yeah,
own for sure.
they do,
Mm.
they do. So I've become a cat dad and all of that.
That's it.
Um, so with last question I have on Lynchburg, and this is something that you kind of learn about on the tour, but only if you know to ask. And I would love for you to just explain a little bit. So Moore County, where Jack Daniel sits, is a dry county. Uh, you can make spirits there, but you cannot sell them. Now, Jack Daniels has the White Rabbit bottle shop on site, so there is a carve out there. But I'd love for you to just explain that carve out to people.
Yeah, it's pretty much if you make it right there on site, then you can sell it through your bottle shop. Um, and I want to say that is a relatively new law, within the last decade. Um, and we can do tastings, and the tastings you will notice are very small pours. Um, but you won't see like any liquor stores throughout Lynchburg. That goes to the dry county thing. We call it kind of a moist county because there is a gas station on either end of town, and you can buy beer there, but just no liquor. So it is always a fascinating thing to be able to tell everybody that Jack Daniels, where every drop of Jack Daniels is made, that county's a dry county, and there are no liquor stores. Like I said, you can go to the White Rabbit and still get some of the commemorative bottles, some of our special releases, and different things like that. Um, but yeah, no liquor by the drink or anything like that.
I have to find or coax a friend to get online for me when that when this year's limited release comes out, because I've seen some pictures of it, I believe, and I'm
Yeah.
very, very excited to
You are
hopefully
gonna
find
love
one.
it.
Yeah,
Yes. Oh my gosh, it is absolutely delicious.
yeah. We'll save that for a little surprise, of course. This month's Impact Spotlight is on White Heather and McNair's blended whiskeys, and the tales of the two men who made these venerable brands what they are. The first is Billy Walker, a 2021 Icons of Whiskey Hall of Fame inductee and owner of the Glenallachie, another Impex brand and a recent podcast guest. Billy has over 5 decades of experience in the Scotch world. With White Heather unshow-filtered blended whiskey, Billy returns to his roots. White Heather was relaunched in 2021 with a 21-year-old blended Scotch, and is now joined by a 15-year-old edition. Both feature 47% single malt in their blend and draw from top stocks in Islay, Speyside, and the Highlands. The 15-year-old is matured in American and Spanish oak casks for a beautiful blend of honey, malt, wispy smoke, and candied citrus. The 21-year-old is matured in American oak and sherry butts for 18 years, before a final 3 years in PX and Oloroso puncheons. This is plus time in medium toast and medium char Appalachian oak for a final burst of sweetness and complexity. The second story is of Harvey McNair. McNair was the essence of a Victorian Scotsman. He accomplished many trades and travels in his lifetime, and more than anything, he loved and championed the natural, unadulterated color of whiskey. Pure gold, as he called it. Pure gold was the foundation of the whiskey blends he created. Today's McNair unshow-filtered blended whiskey, thanks to Billy Walker, honors Harvey's legacy, marrying peated malt, Highland, Islay, and Speyside with Glenallachie spirit. This is a blend for the peat lovers. To find all of these whiskeys and any Impex product, visit a premium spirits retailer near you. You can also visit Impex at www.impexbev.com or email office@impexbev.com for those harder to find releases. The Whiskey Ring podcast is proudly sponsored by Impex Beverages. Again, looking back to that Dad's Drinking Bourbon interview from last year, Chris was on that particular episode, and one of the things he said, I'm paraphrasing, was that he feels that you need to understand the parts of the process so that you can explain and experience the whiskey as more than just the dram in front of you. And that's something that you had echoed in other interviews as well. So it's definitely something that's an ethos from the team, if you will. And clearly, having come up the way you did, the process. You're able to, as we've already seen, throw those numbers and the yeast being the single strain and all these things off the top of your head. So you've got that down. The question I have on that, I'm going to press you on this just a little bit, is regarding the single malt and the malt whiskey.
Okay.
So just a short background. So for me, when I try a product that's finished or double maturation and something else, I always want to try that base spirit first, because I want to know what's that profile that you're working off of. Kind of like if you're looking at an exploration of Jack Daniels, you have to start with the old number 7. That's the core, and everything else gets compared to it and contrasted, but you have to know what the core profile is there. And so far, we've seen 2 releases that included the malt whiskey, the triple mash from 22, and then the double barreling, which was finished for 2 years in Oloroso casks. That was late 22, early 23. So in the spirit, no pun intended, of understanding the parts of the process, will we see the malt whiskey on its own?
I kind of hope so. I really do, because we've got enough laid down that I feel certain that we could let some out, and even if it is a small special release, um, because I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Knowing everything that went into making that whiskey, um, I will say it has a very different character, being 100% malted barley. Now that's in the yeast mash and in the regular grain, the overall grain bill. It's a very different character than people that are normally drinking a Tennessee whiskey or a rye whiskey would be used to. So I think it was almost introducing it, um, kind of a soft introduce, because malt whiskey has a lot of the grain character. Um, Even though it's not an overpowering grain, like corn's going to give you that grainy sweetness, rye's going to give you spicy. Malt, to me, it almost tastes just like the grain, like malty, almost hay or grass. Like in Scotch production, I mean, there's a reason they age it for so long, which now their climate is very different than ours, and they're using second or third use casks, barrels. Um, but I think it is something that it just needs a little extra age, because there's a flavor in there. To me, it's kind of that hay grassy flavor that comes along with malt whiskeys. And I think just to do our due diligence, we got to give it a couple more years. I the last just standalone rye that I'd tried, we had our warehousing guys pull some samples, and I'd had some from 15, 16, and 17. And of course, I think I've probably tried it a lot more than most people, because I can't say I've had American single malts before we started putting ours out. Um, or before we started really kind of building our batches. And then we kind of do like a competitive set and taste other people's. And I mean, I know I'm a little partial, but I absolutely love ours in compared to the competitive set. So it's something I'm really proud to put out. I think that adding it with the Oloroso sherry cask, letting it finish in there. I think it actually sat in the cask for about 2.5 years, and it did add such a good sweetness to it, but you can still taste that malt in there. And I know you're not sipping, but I happen to have all my taster glasses right here.
Of course.
Because I mean, it has that, when you go to smell it, it has that one note I'm talking about. And I have come to really absolutely love it. But I could see if somebody's just used to drinking, sipping our old number seven, it's going to be quite the shift for them. But I've had a lot of folks that had like the triple mash or now our twice barreled American single malt. I think they're coming around to malts. I think I'm not sure if the American single malt has the designation fully gone through. Do you know?
Oh, we're still waiting. They had the
Still
public
waiting.
comment period last year, uh, fall of last year, and at first we thought, oh yeah, it'll be by the end of the year. Then it'll be in the spring. Then it'll be in the summer. And now we're hoping end of the year.
We're
I
fingers
mean,
crossed.
they waited 6.5 years to even get the public comment period up. So who knows?
That's wild. That's it.
Yeah.
At some point, it will fully go through. Um, and to me, I'm really excited about that, because that goes back into, like just eye opening to see other people's processes. Did they use 100% malted barley in theirs? Because some people may go straight to used barrels, and they may not do
Mhm.
first use barrels. Now ours are first use barrels, and to me, that adds an amazing character to it, because, um, a lot of malt whiskeys are in used barrels.
Mhm.
So that adds that kind of same complexity I was talking about with the rye whiskey at 70% rye grain. Um, it allows just an absolutely beautiful color and some of those confectionery notes to kind of mix with that malt grain flavor and aroma. It just gives it such a good creaminess, honestly.
Yeah, for
So
for me that
I'm
was
go
yeah.
ahead.
But I was gonna say for me that was it was apparent to me kind of where it was going. I think maybe because the Oloroso was and just is by its nature, it's a strong flavor. And I wasn't sure because I wasn't sure what the single malt tasted like by itself. It was difficult for me to kind of pick out what flavor was specifically the Oloroso and what was kind of Jack's own spin on
Yeah,
a malt whiskey. And I certainly hear what you're saying, that sometimes just needs a few extra years. I've tried a lot of American single malts, and yeah, more often than not, they do take a few more years to age. Maybe not as
they
long as Scotland,
do.
but they take a few years. And even using new barrels, which not everyone, you're right, not everyone's doing. Some are using new, some are using old, some are using 5 gallon barrels, and up from
Right.
there. So I think for me as even less so as a consumer, more so just as someone who likes to taste things and write about them, I would love to see that by itself, and um, even in a limited release, just to say, yeah, this is what it tastes like, and this is what we're doing with it. And then you
Right.
get into the
Yeah.
triple mash and the twice barreled and all of that. And I picked that out only because it was the flip side of how the rye had been rolled out, where you started with the new make rye and then the rested rye and then the single barrel. So it totally flipped it on its head, and I had to ask about that process.
Yeah. Because on the malt process, that takes the absolute most babysitting in the distillery when you're making malt whiskey. It takes that is the longest grain to grind.
Mm.
So it takes a lot longer to mash, to grind the grains to mash. It likes to foam on you. So in our 40,000 gallon fermenters, you can only fill it 3/4 of the way up, and it still may overflow out the manway. Because we're actually controlling that foam just with leaving extra head space instead of an anti-foam or anything like that.
Mm.
Um, so keeping it very controlled on the temperature, and it is, with it being 100% malted barley, then it is a much thinner mash. So comes with its, I'm gonna say, slight hiccups, headaches throughout the distillery, because that same foaming motion will happen at the end of fermentation when you're putting it through the column stills. It wants to foam in there. Excuse me. It wants to foam in the stills, and that throws off your pressure and level transmitters. And it's its own special little beast. Um, but our malt whiskey is fully charcoal mellowed. So that's another different thing about our malt whiskey. And a lot of people ask if it is the same malted barley that's in the other two grain bills, and it is a different one. So where in the other two grain bills, it's 12 makes up 12% of it, and what we're looking for in that is high diastatic power, the amount of enzymes within it, because we don't use external commercial enzymes in our mashing process. We rely solely on the natural enzymes present in the malted barley. Since our malt mash is 100% malted barley, we know that it's gonna break. The enzymes are gonna break down within there. So we actually go versus a distiller's malt that has the high enzymes. We go to a brewer's malt. It's a little more plump of a grain, a little bit more flavorful. That's what we use in our malt mash.
Is that brewer's malt probably a 2 row as opposed to a 6 row?
Um,
Mm.
I think it's honestly we can take both. I want to say which one of those is I can't remember which one of those is the dominant one now, because one of them they don't do as much of.
Ooh,
I want to say you're right, it is a 2 row.
I feel like I feel like the 6 row is more dominant, but the 2 rows coming back because you just get more, as you were saying, the plumpness of the grain is a little more. That to me that rings more of a two a 2 row, but um,
Right,
yeah, but you're right though. As long as you have that diastatic power, that's what you need.
exactly.
It's worth noting. I still find that incredible across Jack Daniel's products that the 12% malted barley is all you need. That you don't need any extra enzymes. There are no commercial enzymes. You're not pitching anything in. That's to me, that's mind blowing for the scale of what you're doing. So
Yeah. So
it's
it's a bad day when your computer program that you're watching, you're sitting in the control room, you're watching the mash floor, and if one of your temperature transmitters are off, say it's 160 degrees, not 148, and you're supposed to be feeding your malt in. I mean, you're denaturing part of that malt, and it will turn
Mhm.
into a thick cooker quick. It makes a very long day. um, so it would be a lot easier and probably a little more cost effective, honestly, to use the commercial enzymes for Tennessee whiskey, but it is, or for our grain bills, but it is, we have graphs that actually show that a commercial enzyme will break down the starches within the grains differently than the natural enzymes do. Our natural enzymes in malt break it down to maltose, two glucose molecules, where the commercial enzymes will normally break it down just to the single glucose molecules. And our yeast actually prefers to eat maltose. Um, it can eat glucose, but it's just going to eat it through too quick. So it will actually change the flavor of our whiskey if we swapped to commercial enzymes. Um, so it's something that I really love being able to tell people that we do this a natural way. Now, there's nothing wrong with people using commercial enzymes. But I take a lot of pride in that we are able to be able to do it a very natural way.
it's also just cool to hear about the how you know that your yeast prefers the different form of sugar as opposed to the two molecules as opposed to the one molecule. And I don't
Hmm.
think I had known that separation before. So that's another thing I
Yeah,
can now throw in the memory bank.
that's
Because
it.
now I got to ask future people, like, if you are using either a mix of enzymes or if you're pitching, okay, have you studied why your yeast like one or the other? So
That's
now I got to
it.
ask.
Yeah, because one of our past microbiologists, I mean, he'd done a lot of studies on that, and we actually have graphs of how much of the DP1, 2, 3, and 4 are remaining using enzymes versus not. And it was actually pretty amazing to see it all put on a graph of pretty much our yield can be better with just using the natural enzymes and producing the same flavor profile.
It's awesome. Still boggles my mind. Uh, so in the last 15 minutes or so that I've got you for, I have two topics that we got to get to. Number one being the Innovation Council and all the innovations you're doing, and then the second one is going to dive into your own history with the agricultural space. Like, can't interview Lex Phillips without asking about that part of the history too.
Exactly.
So we'll start off with the Innovation Council, and this applies again, as many questions do, to both Jack Daniels itself and to Brown Forman as a larger company. So feel free to speak to whatever you can as far as you would like to, as always.
Okay.
So, number one, having the Innovation Council is it one council or multiple councils?
One
One
council.
council. So, having the council to share ideas, to say maybe we should try this, or what's coming up and what's new, and what are the trends. Is there a is there a setup in place where someone has an idea that, what if we tried this finishing or this process, that the council can say, I don't know if this would work for, just throwing names out there, I don't know if this would work for Jack Daniels, but maybe it'll work for Old Forester or Woodford or instead, and let's move that around. Is there an ability to transfer those ideas between companies like that?
I will say that the Innovation Council that I'm on is solely Jack Daniels. I'd say, maybe Old Forester, Woodford, and all them, they may have kind of their own version of that. Um, but ours is just strictly Jack.
Gotcha. So
Yeah.
the specific example that I was thinking of, and again, this may be coincidence, it could be a different kind, it could be anything, was the Tennessee Tasters, the very first one, the High Angel Share.
Yeah.
And that was, I don't have my bottle in front of me. I want to say 2017 that one came out.
I think you're right.
Yeah. And maybe 2 to 3 years later, Old Forester had the 117 series that was named almost identically. It was the same kind of idea.
Yeah.
Um, Slightly higher proof. It was a 110, I believe, instead of 107, but effectively the same thing. Let's find some barrels that had a really high evaporative loss and see what it's like. So there's that sequential journey, and then following that, the year after, if I have my timeline right, you've got the first and then the second batch of Coy Hill. And the to me that follows a thread line of what do you get when you have these barrels that are high in the rick house, tons of evaporation, really concentrated flavors. And so for me, because they're all coming from one larger overarching company, it's almost too coincidental that they would all kind of have the same thought process and not cross over. So I totally understand if you can't answer this question, but I thought it worth to ask, like, was it an idea that just worked at one and then we're like, we should try this for Old Forester. We should try this for then go back to Coy Hill. Or was it
Yeah.
just coincidence?
I'd say, the Coy Hill, that was 100% coincidence. Um, Now, the High Angel Share between us and then Old Forester doing one. Again, I can't speak to how they came up with it because we truly are separated in that way. Brown Foreman owns us all, but we all kind of are still separate on the whiskey plane. Um, so that may have been an idea that they were like, oh, that's that's something we can really do to not lose these barrels that have their uniqueness. They've had just a lot of high angel share. Because it does, like you said, I mean, condensing those flavors,
Mhm.
if you are not if you don't do something with it, you're just going to be batching it into a regular product that may be cut down to 80, 90 proof. So I could see, you know, if you see something out there that's, not even your brand that you really like, that is a good idea, you may explore that. It's not, and just kind of put your own spin on it. It's not trying to steal ideas from anybody. It's just like, wow, almost applauding them, like that's a great idea. Um, so I could see maybe that had happened there. But the Coy Hill, that was purely just coincidence. I know Chris had put Fletcher had put a hold on those barrels for a separate innovation piece that ended up taking longer than he wanted, and it kind of fell through. So he's like, well, we'll just keep a hold on them. And right after I came into my job, um, he had gotten some of the warehousing guys to go pull a bunch of samples of individual barrels. He's like, hey, go proof these, and we're gonna see kind of what we're gonna do with them. I came back with some of those proofs, and he was like, are you serious? I mean, because they were in the 140 to 150 range, and some of them, I mean, I had tested a time or two because I mean, you don't see that often consistently on a whole batch of barrels that got that high proof. Um, so I instantly saw the excitement, that he had. So he went and had them sample some more of the barrels, and it was absolutely fascinating because I mean, these are regular 53-gallon American white oak barrels, the exact same as all the rest of them. Um, but up there right against the roof, and we actually had one that reached 159 proof, 159. Now, it probably didn't have an inch of liquid left in there.
Yeah.
Um, but out of the Coy Hill run, those were each single barrels. So they had to be a certain volume to kind of fall into the single barrel range to where it does not fall through in the system. Um, so, because if it's only 2 gallons and we're used to producing at least, 20 gallons, it's going to be hard.
Mhm.
So, the very low yielding barrels, that's where we released Coy Hill 2.0. And a lot of people absolutely loved seeing those proof ranges because it was, let's see, about 147 or 145 to 156, I believe, is what was in
Something like that.
those.
Yeah.
And it was about 55 barrels with that were just the low yielding. And we put those into four separate barrel sized drums. And so made it small batches. And out of those 55 barrels, it was 4.5 barrels worth of liquid. And that was fascinating because talk about condensed flavors. Now you can
Oh, yeah.
cut it down to whatever proof you're happy with, but my gosh, it's amazing on those Coy Hills and the 2.0, what those flavors really showed to you. To be almost 9 years old or right at 9 years old, I'd say for the Coy Hill 2.0, that was absolutely amazing. So, yeah, I think I got off on a tangent on Coy Hill, but
No,
that's
it's
always
fine.
a fun one to talk about.
That's fine. During our pick, actually, I think that's when I asked you about the Coy Hill and about oh, there was one part of it. Oh, the fact that it was nine, at some even a little like 9.5, pushing 9.5 years old, but that
Yeah.
wasn't part of the selling point. It was the selling point
Mm-mm.
was really that it was like burner proof, hazmat
That's
proof. I think
it.
all but one of the original batches for 1.0 was hazmat, and that was 139.7. I think everything else was 140 and above, and then as you said, batch
Yeah.
two was even
Even
higher.
higher.
So much so that you had to redesign the bottles and the corks and give
Uh-huh.
people explicit instructions. You must store this upright,
That's it.
um, and away
Do
from
not
heat.
fly with it.
Don't fly with it. Uh, which I mean, it's again, it's really cool to think about, to look at the bottles. For example, you mentioned earlier the 150th anniversary that has a special meaning to you. I have a 150th anniversary bottle, empty, but still have a bottle.
Good.
I have a couple of the more recent limited editions, and you can see the bottle design has shifted a little bit over the years. Uh, Actually, the Jack Daniel's website has a great page that's just dedicated to the special releases, where you can see the squat square bottle go
Hmm.
from being more rounded to a little sharper edge and more angled, and then you get to the Coy Hill and has more of a bulb on there, and
Yeah.
it's a little different. um, yeah, we obviously don't have time to go into that now, but there are a couple of episodes that of different podcasts and interviews that I'll include in the show notes for people to listen to really go into detail on how you figured out you had to do a whole new cork and a whole new bottle for these things, and also just more about how you went from the single barrel to the batching for the second one. I'm a huge fan of both. Again, proof hound and proud of it. Uh, and I mean, even for a proof hound, those things were hot, but God, did I love them.
Yeah.
Um, so fantastic. And but to just close out the question, I do understand what you mean about sometimes you see a company do, like Old Forester could have seen Jack Daniels put out this Tennessee Taster High Angel Share and said, I'm sure we've got some bottles. We don't have to wait 5-6 years for them. We've definitely got bottles like barrels rather like that. And just it's not stealing the idea. It's just seeing, oh, do we have that? Yeah, we can do something like that. And it's still going to be
Yeah.
noticeably, one's going to be noticeably Jack Daniels, one's going to be noticeably Old Forester. It's not the
Exactly.
same mash bills, it's not the same places or processes. But just because it's under that same umbrella company, I felt like I had to ask if it was coincidental or not. So, um, personally, I'm satisfied with that answer. If not, other people may ask you, but I had to ask for my
Yeah.
own stuff.
Oh no, that's
Yeah,
fine. But we really do
yeah,
stay pretty separate.
yeah.
We don't have ideations with between us and Old Forester. Um, it's really pretty separate. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure people above us, they mingle a little more, but
Yeah. Right. So I'm gonna have to skip a question on the the Distillery series, the new one, the Tennessee whiskey finished in añejo tequila barrels.
Mm.
That is definitely out now. You can find it. I mean, I don't know if you can find it at the White Rabbit Barrel Shop right now. Bottle shop. I keep flipping those words today.
It's okay.
Um, I don't know if you can find it at the White Rabbit at the moment, but you should still be able to find it throughout places in Tennessee. So definitely worth a try. I think it's going to end up on whether you like tequila or not, or if you think the two notes match up, whether you like it or not. But I think I liked it enough that it was worth a try, and that I'm going to be sharing it. So,
Yeah.
and plus for 45, $50, it's not too much of an investment that if you decide you don't like it, that you can't give it to a friend that likes añejo a little bit more.
There you go. There you go. But it's very
Um,
balanced, so I think it brings two worlds together well. But yes.
Absolutely. So we are at time. May I take 5 minutes just to ask an ag
Yeah,
question of you? Okay.
absolutely.
So, in all of the ways that you've come up through, you have an agricultural background, and
Hmm.
that's different from, Jeff Arnett had more of a chem background. Chris has got a different background as well. Uh, you mentioned in one of the interviews that I listened to that you've been experimenting with heirloom corns and working with the University of Tennessee to revive lost strains. We're a big fan on this podcast of talking about revived strains, particularly could be yeast, could be barley up in Waterford in Scotland, could be rose and rye and Keystone rye, all these different rye varietals in the East. Um, what drew you to the heirloom corn movement, if you will?
I mean, I think with my background in agriculture, I think it would be it's very natural for me to want to tinker a little bit with our grains and just see if there is a little bit of, I'm going to say, terroir to the whiskey. If grain that is grown only in Tennessee or a variety that was actually developed here in Tennessee would actually make the whiskey taste different. So that's something that we've played around with a little bit. And to what you were speaking specifically, working with the UT in Knoxville, where they have a seed bank. So it was a variety that they revive every 5 or 6 years. So we just happened to, and they only need like 5 pounds of it. So they grew up a quarter acre lot for us, and that was a really really cool thing to watch them grow up, just the seeds for our farmer to actually grow, and it's growing next to the distillery this year. So we've done a few things similar to this, but this is the one that I've been most involved in. I'll tell you a kind of a funny story about it. Whenever we got the grain from Knoxville, it was actually Kevin Sanders, barrel man Kevin Sanders. He went and got it for me and brought it back here, and I went and checked on it, and that afternoon, and it was still very hot, like hot, hot, and it had moisture in the bag. And everybody knows if you've got seeds and you got hot and you got moisture, this isn't good.
Right.
Um, so I started calling different departments across Jack Daniels. Does anybody have any floor space that I can pour out about 1,500 pounds of corn and let it air dry? So that one, I'm very dedicated to this one because me and one of my friends, Brian Hardison from the Still House, he helped me move all of this corn, spread it out. Maintenance had an area that was not being used over a weekend. There was a nice clean floor. So it was it took a lot of dedication. Over that weekend, I'd come and visit the corn twice a day and turn it over to make sure all that moisture got out before we could store it. Um, so that was a lot of fun, and I think it's really exciting to be able to grow it right next to the distillery. We've watched it come all the way up. We're getting close to harvest time, and it looks really, really good. So that's a very promising thing. I still need to pull into the field and snag a couple of ears of corn, because a guy named Chris Ray, he works here at the distillery as well. He's our farmer that's growing it. So it makes a complete full circle, checking all the boxes of, a corn variety that was developed in Tennessee. A Jack Daniels employee is growing it on the ground next to the distillery. The assistant distiller may have done, I'll say, little corn snow angels to try and spread the corn out and let it dry. So there's a lot involved in this story, and I hope all the way through the rest of the process, from harvest to getting it actually mashed and in the fermenter and in the barrels, I hope it goes just as smooth and has just as good of stories with it, because I've had a blast with this.
Yeah, you made kind of a reverse malting floor on that. I'm just trying to dry it. Still got that monkey shoulder there, but drying out instead. I know it's still very early in the process for that, but I would love to keep up with you as this goes along. I love these kinds of stories and the revivals of grains. And for me, particularly when you have a very large company that's doing something so micro on level, to see, is this going to play a part? Is this 6, 7, 8 years down the road? Is this a distillery series at 56 or something?
That's it. You never know.
Right. And so I would, definitely keep me posted on that, because I'd love to see where it's going. And I do want to focus more on the corn revival just as much as we've been able to do on the barley varietals and the rye.
Yes.
So I look forward to seeing where that ends up in the Jack Daniels portfolio, and hell, if it just ends up in your own portfolio of a pet project that you really love to do.
Yeah.
We all need something. Even clearly you enjoy your job, and I don't think I've met someone in this industry who doesn't enjoy their job, but you still need those little things that are really like your own, and I can see that's clearly yours. So with that, Lexie, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about all things Jack Daniels, about the rye, about the single malt, the malted whiskey, everything that goes along with it. If you're listening to this and you haven't heard of Jack Daniels, I don't think you really exist, but we're still going to have links to the website, to social media in the show notes. We'll have lists to any reviews that I've been able to do, or write-ups that I've been able to do. Other products that we didn't get to talk about today that I want to mention just briefly: the Jack Daniels 10-year-old batch 2 came out earlier this year, along with the 12-year-old.
Oh yeah.
I liked the 10-year-old quite a bit. I loved the 12-year-old. I think it was just something really, really special. And I look forward to seeing those releases come out and keeping up the vertical, if you will. All open, but I'm still going to keep the vertical. Check out the new Distillery series. They're coming out at about a rate of about 2 a year.
Yeah.
At this rate. And of course, it being August into September, we're coming up on bourbon release series and whiskey release season. So look for that limited release coming out later this year. With that, Lexie, hang on with me for just a minute to close out. This has been another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Thank you so much. Oh, and keep an eye out for those 2 or 3 single barrels that are going to be coming out right around the time this episode airs. Cheers, everybody, and I will see you next week. Hey, folks, thanks for listening to another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. If you like what you hear, please go ahead and click that subscribe, follow, or like button. Leave a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, and let me know what you want to hear. You can reach out to me through the podcast apps, or email me at david@whiskeymyweddingring.com with any suggestions or ideas for new show guests. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/whiskeymyweddingring. That's whiskey with an E, for as little as $1 a month. $5 a month gets you access to bonus content, including our soon-to-resume Under the Influencer series, and $25 a month means you join the Barrel Share Club. Each month, Barrel Share Club members get to try products sent to me for review, bottles from my own collection, and sometimes bottles that I just pick up because they're fun or interesting. Right now, only 5 spots remain in the Barrel Share Club, so grab your place today. Finally, please follow on Instagram. You can follow me at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or at Whiskey Ring Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Whiskey Ring. You can follow on Facebook at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or join the Facebook group, the Whiskey Ringers group. And I hope to see you there. Cheers, thank you for the support, and see you next time.